Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. We'll get going right away with our Audit Committee agenda for today. We have a number of items to get through, but the first one is our External Audit Planning Report. And I see reps from KPMG here, but we'll start with you, Karina. So
right.
Welcome.
Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome, Councillors Marsh and Schneider, to your very first Audit Committee meeting. And welcome back, everyone else. We've got 3 items on the agenda today, and the first of which is the approval of the 2014 External Audit Work Plan, which will be presented by Matt Beddick from KPMG. And here to give a brief introduction to this topic is our City staff member, Sherry Brisbane, the Supervisor of Financial Reporting.
Welcome.
So I just wanted to run over a bit of the background as to why we have an auditor and then introduce Matt. The Municipal Act requires that the City prepare annual consolidated financial statements in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles as published by the Public Sector Accounting Board of the Canadian Institute of Chartered Accountants. The Municipal Act specifically states in Section 296 that a municipality shall appoint an auditor licensed under the Public Accounting Act of 2004, who is responsible for annually auditing the accounts and transactions of the municipality and its local boards and expressing an opinion on the financial statements of those bodies based on their audit. The auditor shall be appointed for a term not to exceed 5 years. We underwent the RFP process for an external auditor earlier this year, and KPMG has been appointed for another 5-year term. 2014's audit represents the first year of this term. This is the first of 2 meetings with KPMG. The second will be held in late spring after their audit is complete, at which time they will present their audit findings. So without further ado, I'll now turn things over to Matt Beddick of KPMG.
Welcome, Matt.
Thank you. Appreciate the time to be here today. We have a formal report that we understand is included in your agenda materials. It starts on page 1-3. I'll take a few moments to go through the highlights of the report, but if it pleases the committee, I'll take questions throughout or take questions afterwards. So if I can bring your attention to page 1-5, where we present an executive summary of the report. I think the most interesting item on this page to make sure that the committee is aware of is on the far right-hand side, and that deals with the audit scope. So in our role as auditors, we're going to issue an opinion on the consolidated financial statements of the City of Kitchener, including all its boards and enterprises that are listed below. In addition to that report, we issue separate audit reports on the trust funds, the Gasworks utility, Kitchener Public Library, the Centre in the Square, Kitchener Downtown Improvement Area, and the Belmont Improvement Area. On page 1-6, we identify a significant upcoming change in accounting standards, and that dealing with the liability for remediation and mitigation of contaminated sites. In short, this standards requires that the city identify any of its properties that has environmental contamination that requires remediation, for which you are either responsible for or have accepted responsibility for. And if there's a requirement to remediate that, you will estimate what that cost is and record it in your financial statements. This would be different from the budget process whereby you look at annual payments for remediation. We've listed out some of the criteria that are required here in the bullet points and need to say that this standard is effective not for the upcoming audit of the fiscal 2014 accounts, but for 2015. So this is still a year plus away before it's required to be reported. And staff has taken on a project to undertaken a project to complete the requirements of the standard. We'll report back a year from now, perhaps with some of the preliminary findings, but for sure in a year and a half when we're presenting the 2015 financial statements. On pages 7 and 8, we identify our audit approach for key accounts and key elements of the financial statements. And on page 7, we start with a discussion with respect to fraud. Now, every external auditor of financial statements is required to consider fraud in the financial statements that they're auditing. And when we talk about fraud, we talk about either misappropriation of assets, or we're talking about fraudulent reporting, i.e., cooking the books or telling lies in the financial statements. There are two main areas. That's the fraud from revenue recognition, which we do not have to consider in the City of Kitchener's case because of the nature of your revenue generating activities. But we do have to look at fraud from the override of internal controls. So whatever controls and good processes you have in place, we as the auditors have to assume that those controls can be overridden, and we have a series of steps to look for instances of fraud in those cases. This is no different from any other auditor and any other audit engagement of any other enterprise, and it has been a part of the standard for a number of years. On page 8, we identify some of the other areas of the financial statements, including post-employment benefits, the obligatory reserve funds, which in your case is mostly development charge reserve funds, and tangible capital assets, why these are key accounts, and what our audit approach is with those. I won't go through them in detail. As well, on pages 9 and 10, we identify the gasworks operation, given its high value to the organization, the volume and complexity of some of the transactions. We also identify several other significant accounts, including investment income and investments and related investment income, taxation revenue, user charge revenue, and expenses, both payroll and non-payroll. On page 11, we identify the concept of materiality. Materiality is the benchmark that the auditor uses to determine whether or not there are errors in the financial statements. And we provided a lot of data on this page, but I want to highlight the fact that we've set materiality at approximately $3.5 million, which represents about 1% of the total revenues of the city consolidated. You might say 3.5 is a big number, and clearly this organization and this group here is interested in things a lot smaller than 3.5 million. But from an evaluation of the financial statements, we look at how does that change the user's view of the size and scope of the City of Kitchener's operations. So at $325 million, the auditor says, if that was higher or lower by $3.5 million, would you make a different decision as to the size and scope of the operations? And our view is that you wouldn't at that level. The acceptable ranges for materiality are actually between 1% and 3% of total revenue. So we could actually use a materiality level of approximately $10 million and still be within the audit standards. We thought that number was just a little bit too high and have used a lower benchmark, which is consistent with many of the benchmarks we use for auditing municipalities in the province of Ontario. On page 12, we identify our value for fees, and just to reiterate what Sherry had said, we completed a proposal for audit services in the spring of 2014, and we thank you for the city's continued confidence in KPMG with that appointment, and the fees that we will charge are consistent with that proposal. And the last formal item I'll address is the audit cycle and timetable on page 13. We have already commenced our interim pre-year-end work in November. We'll be back on site to do our annual year-end field work in April and expect to report back to this committee in June, as Sherry had alluded to. So, Mr. Chair, with that concludes my formal remarks, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Matt. And we have a couple questions, at least at this point, for you. Councillor Gazzola.
Just dealing with the audit scope on 1.5, where does Kitchener Power Corporation come into that?
Sure thing. So Kitchener Power, being the government business enterprise that's owned by the City of Kitchener, we do perform an audit of Kitchener Power. KPMG is also the appointed auditors for that organization. And its accounts are not consolidated within the City of Kitchener per se on a line-by-line basis, but their net income is included as a one-line item pickup on your income statement.
So that's the difference. They're not consolidated in here.
They are not consolidated.
Where everything else here is consolidated.
That is well, actually, with the exception of the trust funds by their definition are not consolidated.
The on 1.6, this is a change that's coming into place. Do you or maybe staff, do we have any idea what kind of an impact this might have on us?
So on this front, we've talked to other area municipalities and our auditors, and we've determined that the approach that we're taking is consistent. And essentially at this point in time, we are reviewing the parcels of land owned by the city to determine whether they fit the criteria as laid out in KPMG's presentation. The review to date indicates that the city will not have a liability of any significance to record upon adoption, but we will continue to review for any changes that happen between now and it coming into effect.
Okay, so as far as it looks now, it doesn't look too big an issue.
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay. Just one final question. The materiality figure of 325 million, that's made up of what? Revenues, is that right?
That's based on approximate revenues, yes.
Which is what, our taxation primarily?
That would be taxation, it would be water and sewer revenues, user charges, grants, gasworks revenues, any other ancillary revenues.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Councillor Fernandez.
Thanks. So just going to page 1-8, under obligatory reserve funds, one of the statements I highlighted was identify and evaluate the operative effectiveness of internal controls over the identification of development charge funding and allocations of related expenses. So at present, our DC charge fund is in a negative, or it may be starting to go into a positive, but how would what you do relate to that if we are in a negative position, if we don't start building that reserve fund? What would your recommendations be?
Well, our process wouldn't look at the necessarily whether the DC fund is in a positive or negative position. If your DC fund is in a negative position, it clearly means that you've undertaken the development work in advance of issuing the permits that are associated with that development work. Our audit process really looks at whether or not an expenditure incurred and recorded as development related is actually associated with the development that they're saying it's supposed to be related to, as well as making sure that the revenue that's recognized in the financial statements follows the accounting rules. And it's important to note that the revenue that's recognized, i.e. shown as revenue in the financial statements, is different from the timing of cash receipts. And that's why it's recorded as a deferred revenue, because oftentimes the cash is received in advance, despite what you're saying. If your DC fund is in a negative position right now, that cash is received in arrears. So unfortunately, I don't have a recommendation for you per se, because that's more of a financing matter. We're just merely concerned with whether or not the accounting has been followed properly.
So would you be reviewing things like credit for refund agreements then?
To the extent that they require refunds from the development charges or amounts to be paid back from developers, yes, because that's a reduction in the deferred revenue account.
Okay. And would you ever make a recommendation to either support or not support a credit for refund agreement, or would you? I think
that would be outside of the scope of our work.
Okay.
And I don't think we're qualified to comment on that.
Okay. I just wasn't sure. I just needed to understand. Thanks. So on the same page, there's a bullet point that talks about revenue of significant work orders. So what kind of work orders would you be reviewing?
These could be capital work orders or non-capital work orders to ensure that they, again, met the accounting rules and were recorded properly in the financial statements.
Okay. On the next page, you talk about the gasworks.
Yes.
And the high volume of transactions and complexities. And and the potential impact on future gas supply and delivery rates. So when there's that high volume of transactions, you talk about complexities. Can you give me an example of what kind of complexities you might be noting?
Okay. In the recording of gas inventories, the price for gas fluctuates throughout the year, and recording the gas inventory both in and out is subject to some complexity. There's also the amount of gas that the delivery co-department company maintains, and the impact of those gas inventories. Sometimes that gas inventory is depleted to zero, so making sure those accounts are addressed properly. There's also a calculation for unbilled revenue that could impact the year-end account. So this is gas that's delivered before December 31st, but billed after December 31st to make sure that's captured properly. There are also several other complexities within the purchasing and procurement process. For example, there are toll charges that relate to gas purchased or delivered from the storage facility to the City of Kitchener distribution points, as well as something called fuel gas, which is the gas that you're actually deducted from your account for moving the natural gas again from the storage facilities to the city distribution system. So those are just sort of laundry list off the top of my head.
Okay, thank you. So essentially what you'd be looking for would be inconsistencies in the reporting of these? Is that my understanding?
We'd be looking for errors.
Errors.
Yes, errors in the calculation, missed information, double counted information, things of that nature.
Okay. Then the other question I had was when on 1-10, under expenses, you talk about evaluate the design and implementation of controls over payroll and non-payroll expenses. So you would be looking for inconsistencies in the payroll, and when you talk about non-payroll expenses, what would you be talking about?
Non-payroll expenses could be contracting out yard maintenance work, tree cutting, could be paying the hydro bill, any other expense that's not related to paying your people. It could be capital or operating in nature. Okay. We're not necessarily looking for inconsistencies. We're looking to see that there are internal controls in place, and where those internal controls exist, we can rely on those controls to impact the extent of other testing of direct documentation that we're required to perform.
Is there a percentage of error that you allow for something like that?
For the City of Kitchener testing, we expect an error rate of basically zero. If we get an error rate above zero, then we move to a different type of testing. Okay. We look for key controls, ones that we expect not to fail, and so our risk of failure is considered low. Okay, all right.
Thank you very much for your help.
Oh, you're welcome.
Okay, any further questions? If not, does somebody want to move the recommendation? Moved by Councillor Ioannidis. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Great. Thanks a lot, Matt. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Move on now to item number 2, the 2015 Service Review and Internal Audit Work Plan. And back over to you, Karina.
All right. So before I get into the details of the actual work plan, I'd just like to take a step back and put the work that I do in internal audit and the service review work that's done by others in the corporation into context, mostly for the benefit of the new councillors as well as a refresher for the returning councillors. The overall goal of my internal audit work and the service review work, regardless of who performs it, is to protect the city's assets and interests. So this includes protecting things like our physical assets as well as our staff, our citizens, our reputation, and our financial assets. And we do this through 3 branches of work. So by ensuring that our operations are efficient and effective, by ensuring controls are adequate to protect our assets from loss, and also ensuring compliance with policy, procedures, and legislation. So we use many different tools to assess our internal and external services, depending on the issues or risks that need to be analyzed or addressed. So you'll find a complete list of the types of reviews that we perform and their definitions in Appendix A of your report. So back in 2012, you'll remember Council approved a framework to help prioritize all of the services that the city provides in terms of which ones to review next. The framework included a weighted score that was made up of inherent risk of the service, the expense budget, and the date of the last review. It was initially estimated that the resulting prioritized list would take approximately 6 years to work through with our current resources. And the resources include not only myself, but the 3 service coordination and improvement managers from each of the 3 departments. Each year, we review the accomplishments from the prior year, select the next set of services to review, and then discuss whether there are other priorities that would supersede the original order of the reviews. The completed work plan is brought back to Audit Committee for information. Now, the Audit Committee terms of reference require that the Audit Committee approve the internal audit work plan, and so this has been shown separately for your consideration. So this is the internal audit work plan that I'm requesting your approval on. The top 3 items are those which are also included in the integrated service review work plan. They include continuing the comprehensive audit of the community centers, which began earlier this summer and will continue throughout next year. You will all be given an opportunity to participate in this review early in the new year, as I know that this topic is one that is near and dear to many of you. It will also include looking at the hours of service, which was a council idea that was put forward in the recent strategic session. Once that review wraps up in early fall, I will begin a comprehensive audit of the accounting division, and this review will span into 2016. And the final service review will be an organizational review of the Office of Mayor and Council, which will occur in April. This will simply look at the org structure of the staff in your office, including roles and responsibilities, to ensure that the structure best meets the needs of this new council. You will also be asked for your input on that review. Oops. In addition to the service reviews, I also like to include some traditional controls and compliance type work to ensure that the controls are strong and that staff are complying with all rules and legislation. The first such review will be to look at employee expenses. Inappropriate spending in other municipalities have made the headlines in the recent past, so it seems a good time to ensure that our processes have a high degree of scrutiny and that staff are not abusing the system. I noticed in the list of council ideas that there were 2 that were related to council expenses. So perhaps as part of this discussion today, you can debate whether or not you want me to include council expenses in the scope of this review. With this being a new council, the period from which to draw a sample will be very small, but it might still be worthwhile to look at the process and the policies at least. We can discuss that when I get to the end of this section. The second controls type audit is the follow-up audit to hiring transparency. And this has been on the books for quite some time now, and I keep postponing it. The reason being I don't want to re-audit this process until HR has had a chance to make changes to it. They have just finished reviewing the HR-led hiring processes and have made recommendations in this area. And they will now be turning their attention to looking at the non-HR-led hiring processes in early 2015. So this is the hiring that occurs within the departments without the assistance of HR. Assuming that they complete that review and have implemented their recommendations by the latter part of the year, I will then do my follow-up audit to ensure that they have addressed all of my findings. If not, then this may get pushed into 2016. And the final bucket of work is the recurring activity. So every year I do account verification of our physical inventory, and I'll share more on that in a moment. I also try to get around to all of our facilities to do petty cash counts. And finally, I will conduct any confidential investigations that are required. So before I get you to approve this, I do want to show you the entire integrated service review work plan so that you get an overall picture of all of the service review work that's being undertaken. In addition, you will find a complete list of the prioritized services in Appendix B of your report. So that shows the reviews which have been completed already, are in progress, or which will be undertaken in the future. So it can help you decide if the current work plan is appropriate or whether there are other priorities that you feel should be undertaken in 2015. So the first 3 items are the reviews which I've already spoken about, which are included in my work plan, and the remaining items are completed by the service coordination and improvement managers. First, there'll be a risk assessment of the entire IT division, and this will form input into their strategy, and this will be done by Catherine Dever in FCS. She will also be coordinating the process and service delivery reviews of 2 services within the HR division, namely the accommodations process and the non-HR-led recruitment process, as I mentioned previously. And the last item is a placeholder for work that will be carried out by Ralph Thiel in the INS department. We purposely left this blank at this point to give Mr. Tyagi an opportunity to assess the priorities within the INS department. So I'll pause there and open up things for discussion. First, I'd like some direction on the scope of the employee expenses review and whether you want council expenses to be included or not. And then we can discuss the work plan.
Councillor Fernandez.
Thanks, Karina. I'm glad to see the areas that you're covering off. I think that they are ones that are important. As far as the employee expense audit, what level will you be looking at with the employees? Is it at every level, at all levels where expenses are incurred? And
yes, and it will be a random sample, so it could be from Jeff all the way down to the frontline staff, and it will be a much more detailed look at expenses than what KPMG will be looking at. So it'll be more, are they following our policies, and do they have a proper approval, do they have proper backup, that sort of thing.
Okay. So your question was whether council's expenses should be audited at the same time. Yeah. How much additional time would you say that would take for you?
I would just add it into my sample. It's just a matter of whether you want to be included in scope or not.
Mm-hmm. And personally, I don't see any problem with that. I will look to my colleagues to see how they feel. But from my perspective, I think it's always good for transparency and accountability. I do have a question about the priority list of services. Do you want me to ask that now or after everybody else has had a chance?
Go ahead and ask it now.
Okay. So I noticed that engineering has not been audited, or at least nothing on the previous work plan going back to 2006. Engineering, gas and water, both, it's listed there twice, so I wasn't quite sure why. First, I need to understand that. That's on 2-7.
The original list of services was broken down, so there may be, within the engineering division, there may be several sections, and that's why they're listed separately. So there's engineering design and approvals that I see here. Engineering, admin, gas and water, that's actually part of Kitchener Utilities. That's not part of the engineering division. Development engineering. In terms of why they have not been tackled yet, this all comes down to the prioritization. So when we looked at what are the inherent risks in their business, what is their total expense budget, and what is the date of the last review. So obviously they haven't been reviewed before, but the other components weighed more heavily in the ranking. So we're working through them in the priority order, and we will get to them eventually.
Okay. And do you have a sense? I mean, because there's 4 on this one page, I guess the fact that engineering has not been audited, and because now we've entered into stormwater utility fees, and it has another component to it, which may make it more complex. Do you have a sense of when that area will be audited?
Based on current resources, not likely for another couple years.
Okay, all right. It's just that there's a lot of work that is done through engineering and high dollar value projects. So that's kind of why I was thinking it might be something that we should move up a bit higher. But
so you're thinking about engineering the division, not engineering as part of Kitchener Utilities,
right?
Just to be clear,
right? Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Mr. Chapman, you wanted to add something there?
What may be helpful to the committee is to circulate a list of reviews that have been done previously. You're right, I don't believe there's been a comprehensive review, But if I recall correctly, Karina undertook an audit of their project management processes after stimulus projects were completed. So there have been a few focused reviews on their project management approach, which I think is what you were alluding to. So before finalizing any decision on that, it may be helpful to circulate to Council again a list of what has been looked at and what the scope of the review and the timing was. Councillor Galloway-Seelock.
Yeah, I just wanted to put my 2 cents in with regards to the employee expenses. And I would agree that I think that ours, councils should be looked at the same time. I think overall it's a report that needs to go together and come together to make sure that we look at the organization as a whole, and council should be not treated any differently and looked at as well through that process.
Councillor Etherington.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. Corina, I would very much agree with what was just said. I'd very much support an audit of council expenses. But I wanted to ask you, how comprehensive would that be? Would it be for all councillors?
I think if we included council, it would need to be.
Great. And how detailed would it be? Would you look at mileage, conference expenses, home office expenses?
Yes, I would look at all of that. Yeah, I'd need to write up my audit plan, but I envision it encompassing all of those types of expenses.
That would be great. Thank you.
Okay, those are all the questions at this point. There is a recommendation there. Somebody want to move it? Moved by Councillor Ioannidis. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. That includes the council part. And moving on to item 3, the fourth quarter audit status report.
All right. So the quarterly status report is where I provide you summaries of the audits conducted in the previous quarter. We did not have an audit committee meeting in September, so this report includes all activities since June. So today I'll be telling you about the annual physical inventory count, as well as the results of the comprehensive audit of the purchasing section. Also in progress at this time are a final debrief of the election process, a debrief of the 3-year Integrated Planning Center of Excellence, and as mentioned, the comprehensive audit of the community centers. So with physical inventory, every year myself and one lucky volunteer from the accounting division go down to the COF to verify the physical inventory count that has been done by the store's staff. So this year I had the help of Becky Hamilton, and I think it's actually the first year in recent history that we haven't been snowed on or rained on when we were out counting pipe in the yard, so that's a good thing. We take a sample of different inventory items and do our own count to ensure the accuracy of the staff counts. To do this, we follow standard inventory count methodologies by doing both sheet-to-floor and floor-to-sheet audits. With the sheet-to-floor audits, we pre-select a list of part numbers, which include the top 40 total values and the top 40 unit values. We count them and then compare them back to the inventory system quantities. We also do floor-to-sheet audits, where we randomly select 30 locations throughout the warehouse, count the parts, and then compare to the system. So this methodology means that we have verified 27% of the total value of inventory. So the results of this year's audit are very positive. There were only 8 variances found between what we counted and what the staff counted, all of which were explained. The overall inventory count saw a total write-down of roughly $3,000, which is down from $8,000 last year, and it's the lowest write-off that we've ever had. This equates to 0.05% shrinkage rate, which is very low and can be compared to the industry standard of 2.5%. The inventory process remains in control, and store staff are commended for the great job that they do at ensuring the accuracy of our inventory records and protecting our assets. So are there any questions on this audit before I move on?
Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, I just wanted to double check. What are the inventory figures? How much do we have in inventory?
I believe, hold on one sec, I think it's...
I have a figure here from the financial statements. I just wonder.
1.9 million.
Pardon?
1.9 million is the inventory balance.
Okay, so if I read the financial statement, it says 10.7 million. What is that? Is that gas or?
Mr. Chapman?
Through the chair, we can confirm it, but I'm fairly certain that that includes gas held in inventory, which again is not held on site, obviously, and is confirmed through other means.
Okay, that's yeah. So our inventory that we have in our stores are only 1.7 million. Did you say?
1.9 million
Yeah.
at the point of time of the audit.
Which is a very small figure.
Yes.
Really, the in line with this, when did the KOF come into play? When was it open? When did our stores move to the KOF?
Now you're stretching my memory. Does anyone else know the answer?
Okay. I'm just curious, in view of the low inventory and all that, and we did centralize the store's operation. I'm just curious as to, is there any difference in staff numbers?
I don't believe there's any difference in staff numbers, but there is definitely efficiencies gained in terms of the amount of inventory that we carry and the amount of purchases that we make throughout the year.
Okay, I would have thought with the centralization, we previously, if I remember correctly, had stores in 2 or 3 different locations. Did we not?
Yes, we had 3 locations before. We still have the same volume of customers coming in to get, so other divisions that are coming in to get the inventory, and we've got 2 different counters, one that's related to fleet and one at the other side of the warehouse that is for operations and FM, and they work a 24-hour shift, so they do require the same amount of staff.
Is gas and water in there too?
Yes.
Also?
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Chapman, you wanted to add something?
I think Karina's touched on it. One, that the hours of service were extended to align with the operation facility hours, so there were additional hours being worked. Tool cribs were merged into the stores facility, so that was additional work taken on. But I think to get to the heart of your question, we've seen a real improvement in the economic order quantities. So we used to hold a lot in inventory across 3 locations, and to be honest, a lot of it was old inventory, some obsolete inventory. So I think the staff has done a lot of work to minimize the amount of material held in inventory in order on a just-in-time basis. So in our view, it's a good thing that the amount that we're holding in stores is going down because it's being ordered just in time.
Okay. Thank you. Karina, if you want to continue?
Sure. All right, so this is the last item for today, and it's the comprehensive audit of the purchasing section. So this review was completed by myself and Catherine Dever, who is here with us today. And I'd just like to acknowledge the great work that Catherine did as part of this review and how much I appreciate working with her. The purpose of this audit was similar to all comprehensive audits in that we wanted to examine all facets of the section, including the services, processes, controls, resourcing, risks, and culture. I will note that we are only talking about the purchasing section of supply services and that the stores section was out of scope for this review. And this is because stores has already undergone 3 previous audits. We started off our review by speaking to all 7 staff within the section to get their opinions on what was working well and what could use improvement. Similarly, we also spoke to a cross-section of internal stakeholders, including frontline staff, management, and 2 members of council. Included in this group was 1 staff member who was previously an external customer who was able to give us the perspective of a bidder. From this input, we created a risk register for the section, which captured, rated, and prioritized risk potentially affecting the success of the section. We reviewed several internal and external documents, including the purchasing bylaw and purchasing guide. And we also reviewed benchmarking data from several municipalities, including Burlington, Brampton, Oakville, Vaughan, Sudbury, Windsor, Cambridge, and the region. Next, we looked at several processes which had been identified by stakeholders or staff as areas for improvement. And finally, no purchasing audit would be complete without testing the controls and compliance within purchasing policies. So overall, we found that staff have a great deal of knowledge and expertise in the procurement field. We also heard from internal customers that they are friendly and easy to work with. The purchasing processes were found to be open, fair, and transparent, and policies were applied consistently by staff. From end to end, the processes have a solid set of controls, including things like approval levels and controls within SAP, management and council oversight over the larger and more complicated purchases, and back-end auditing of checks by accounts payable. Our testing found only a few instances of non-compliance, and these instances can be categorized as isolated, non-recurring, and very small dollars. They were also innocent in nature and did not represent malicious intent or fraudulent behavior. In light of recent negative headlines in other municipalities related to inappropriate purchasing, these results can be something that the city is proud of. It speaks to the integrity of our staff and the ability to develop and manage a comprehensive purchasing program. Through our report to staff, we have provided the section with several minor recommendations for improvements and tweaks to their processes. There were 3 main findings, however, which are critical for the section to address in order to ensure their success going forward and allow them to provide more value to the organization. First, the section lacks any formal mandate or goals. As a result, staff have a general sense of why their work is important, but no common understood goals to work towards and by which to frame all of their decisions. There is also no explicit linkage to the work that they do to the FCS department service strategy. As a member of the department, it is important that they align their purpose and direction with the direction of the department. Second, all staff within the section and even some customers have acknowledged that there are some issues with the culture within the section. Having a negative culture presents many risks, including the risk of stress, burnout, health issues, and staff turnover. And third, customers indicated there was a lack of business partner focus. Although the section has well-defined processes, templates, and instructions, customers would like a more proactive interaction with purchasing and hands-on assistance with the purchasing process. This ties into the FCS service strategy, which talks about building internal relationships, being collaborative, understanding client needs, and being a business partner. So I'll now take you through the recommendations for each of these findings. With regard to the mandate and goals, we have recommended that the section develop goals which are aligned with and support the FCS service strategy. This will ensure that everyone is working towards the same thing and that decisions are made which are consistent with that direction. Linked to this is the development of key success factors, or in other words, things which need to happen in order to say that they are a success. These can be used to measure the section and individual performance going forward. Next is the negative culture issue. Culture doesn't change overnight, and we are not expecting this to be a quick fix. But we are recommending that work must be done by the director to develop the team, encourage positive workplace behaviors, and hold those accountable who do not live the people plan values. If this is not done, we run the risk of losing good staff and perpetuating the problem. In order to truly become a business partner, purchasing must become more proactive and flexible when dealing with internal customers. And by being flexible, we don't mean relaxing the controls, as they have served us well, but rather being more flexible to help customers address their business needs, looking for solutions together and working collaboratively. We are recommending that buyers work with clients at the start of the process to determine when they need the good or service, and then work backwards from there to create the timeline for decisions, such as when the award will close, when the recommendation needs to be submitted, and when the award will go to council if applicable. Hand in hand with this proactive dialogue is creating a standard script and checklist for what to discuss with new or infrequent clients. They don't know the process or what questions to ask, so purchasing staff should be walking them through the process. This will help to set expectations up front and avoid surprises later. And finally, it is recommended that each buyer take on the responsibility for strategic procurement analysis of the commodities that they are responsible for, such as analyzing annual vendor spends, trends, and opportunities for discounts and savings. The director should do similar analysis at the corporate level, and results should be discussed by the entire team semi-annually. This type of analysis provides much more value add to the corporation and leverages the vast knowledge of the purchasing staff. Now, as I mentioned, we did not find fault with any of the controls or any instances of fraud. I would like to take you through the analysis that was done, however, in order to provide you more assurance, since the integrity of municipal purchasing functions does receive a lot of public scrutiny. The city's purchasing bylaw is very comprehensive and includes several control points. I've listed some of those controls in your report, so I won't go through them here again. But I will mention one piece of misinformation that I've received. In your reports, it says that checks greater than $2,000 and every third check under $2,000 is peer audited, when in fact the process is to peer audit every fourth check regardless of the amount. So I just wanted to clarify that and apologize for the error. As part of this review, we conducted 8 separate tests to ensure the process was fair, open, and transparent, and that the opportunity for fraud was limited. So the first test was to determine if there were any fictitious vendors in our vendor master file. 2 typical red flags are the existence of duplicate vendors where the name, address, or phone number are the same or near matches, and when a vendor has nothing more than a P.O. box as an address. Through the first test, we had 825 matches. So it became clear to me that I would not be able to search through this list to verify the validity of each one, and that there are several reasons where there may be legitimate duplicates, such as multiple businesses residing at the same address, reuse of phone numbers, and multiple branches of the same company at different addresses. So we've given the file back to purchasing to remove the duplicates and clean up the master file. And going forward, they will need to look more closely for duplicates before setting up new vendors. The second test yielded 3 inconclusive vendors where I was not able to find proof on the internet, in the yellow pages, or other directories that the business exists. So purchasing will further investigate these businesses by calling them or through other means. The second test deals with the contractor safety program. Under this program, purchasing staff or staff representatives are required to obtain certain safety-related documents, such as WSIB certificates and insurance from all service vendors. For this test, I took a 20% sample of all field orders for service vendors from a 3-month period. Field orders are for amounts that are less than $3,000, and therefore purchasing staff are not involved in the process. The staff representative would be the one responsible for collecting the documentation. From the sample of 31 vendors, 7 were missing documentation. We are recommending that purchasing follow up with these staff to make them aware of the process. We're also recommending that purchasing needs to work with HR to develop a process for these decentralized service purchases where purchasing is not involved to ensure that all documentation is collected in the future. The third test was to determine whether staff are splitting their purchases into smaller dollar amounts in order to avoid formal purchasing processes. For this test, I reviewed approximately 25,000 invoices for a 6-month period, grouped by vendor name. I then focused on the ones where there were multiple purchases for less than $3,000 that totaled to more than $25,000, possibly indicating that a tender or quotation process should have been followed. There were 13 vendors, which I then investigated further. Out of all of these invoices, only 1 vendor was found where there were split purchases, which is pretty good, considering the amount of invoices. When speaking with the division who purchased the goods, the manager is now in the process of determining if this purchase meets the criteria for sole sourcing, and if not, will institute a tender process going forward. The fourth test was to determine if director approval had been obtained for blanket or contract POs where the term is greater than 3 years, as stipulated in the purchasing guide. A 20% sample of all such blanket and contract POs was taken, and it was found that 8 were approved by council, and thus the director approval was implicit, and 1 was approved verbally by the supervisor of purchasing. I was also informed that this was in fact the current process. So given that I don't have an issue with this process, we simply recommend that the purchasing guide be updated to reflect the actual process. The next test was to determine if council approval had been obtained for POs which had been overspent by more than 10% as per the purchasing bylaw. Unfortunately, purchasing does not track this information and it cannot be obtained from SAP. Therefore, our recommendation is for purchasing to start tracking this anytime they increase a PO, including the council report number for any that are greater than a 10% increase. This will assist in future audits and will also help the division determine how often POs are being increased. Next, we wanted to look at the sole sourcing list and process. In general, any sole sourcing contracts must be approved by the Director of Supply Services and must meet several criteria. Purchasing then maintains a list of all sole source vendors. The vendors on the list seemed reasonable to us and did not raise any red flags. Our only recommendation is that this process could be even more transparent if the list was posted on the internet along with the criteria and rationale for each. The purchasing bylaw prohibits purchasing goods or services from any employee or family member of an employee without first getting council approval. To run this test, I matched the vendor master file against the employee master file based on the address and phone number. There were 27 matches, which I investigated further. 14 were deemed acceptable and included such things as expense reimbursement. The remaining 13 were deemed likely conflicts of interest. They were all one-time purchases and small dollars and did not represent ongoing purchases from the vendors. We are recommending first that purchasing periodically remind all staff of the policy. And second, we are recommending that purchasing follow up with both the purchaser and the vendor employees to make them aware of the policy and determine if they intend to continue business with the city. And if so, then a formal council approval will be required. And the eighth and final test was to ensure the validity of situations where the invoice was greater than the goods received by more than 10%. All invoices which fell into this category over a one-year period were investigated. Only 14 vendors had such situations, and all were properly explained and approved. They also represented very small dollars. The differences between the invoices and goods receipts included things like differences in units of measure, timing of credits received to offset the variance, and the inclusion or exclusion of taxes. So to sum up, we really do have a solid purchasing function here at the city, which is something to be proud of. The recommendations focus on how to get the team working more cohesively together and with their clients in order to bring more value to the corporation. Implementing the recommendations will move the section from being viewed as transaction-based to being a strategic function and a valued business partner. As with all audits, the director will be required to review the findings and recommendations with staff and will come back to me with an action plan to address the findings. Are there any questions with this audit?
There are a few. Councillor Fernandez.
Thanks, Karina. I appreciate this. I think I was one of the people who had asked a number of questions about this. I get back to page 3-5. You talk about business partner focus, and one of the comments that you said was more proactive process. Can you explain a little bit further what you mean by that?
So right now, a lot of times it's clients, so internal clients, coming to purchasing in order to buy the goods and services that they want. So it's more proactive in that they will meet with the client user divisions and work with them in terms of laying out the entire process from start to finish, working with them to find out when do they need the goods and services, working backwards from there, as opposed to just giving them a template or a form to fill out. So being much more hands-on.
Okay, thank you. So going through, so I'm just trying to find my highlighted pages. On 3-22, you talked about, and this goes back again, follows along with the same business part of focus. So you may have answered this question. You were talking about being more flexible. So I want to reiterate what I just heard is essentially not just handing them a template, but working with them through an internal client. Just an example. Can you give me an example of what an internal client would be?
Any division within the city that wants to buy goods or services. So in particular, larger dollar ones where they need purchasing's involvement to do a quotation or a tender or an expression of interest for a consultant. So just being more flexible in terms of, yes, we have rules and we have controls, but how can we still meet your needs rather than just saying no or here's the set process.
So if I was to say, for example, our trails staff wanted to go and do some work on a particular trail that needs work, they would have to go to purchasing and sit down with them and talk to them about how they would proceed with a tender for work to be done on a trail. So it would be whatever materials are needed, whatever consultant we needed, or work that we needed. Is that what you mean?
Yes.
Okay. All right. When you talked about fictitious vendors, you said you found 825 matches. Did that raise a bit of a red flag for you?
It was different than what I was expecting. I was expecting to find a few, and those were the ones I was going to investigate further for fraud. But given that there was so many, it was clear that there was just duplicates being input. When I was looking at them, like I said, there were valid reasons for some of them. So multiple branches of the same company. There was, multiple businesses running out of a strip mall that all had the same address. There were also ones that looked very clearly that they were just duplicates. There was one, like maybe the period on the ink wasn't there, so it was, someone had looked for it before and set up a new vendor, not realizing that it was already in the file. So I think there's definitely opportunity to clean it up, and I think that certainly there could be the possibility of fraud in that 825. I just don't have the resources to go through them myself. So.
Yeah, of course. I guess when I saw that number, I thought, wow, that my concern would there be a cost to the city if there are fraudulent vendors out there who are you talked also about staff doing tenders as well. So is it possible that that's where some of that could be in these 825?
That what could
when
be?
you talked about conflict of interests. Is it possible that in those 825 that there are conflict of interest between employees and vendors, or for example, if a family member was a part of these 825 matches?
Potentially, yes, if they had two vendor numbers set up. But the conflict of interest was between the vendor file and the employee file, so it was a different match set of criteria that I was using. These are more likely things where the address is the same or the phone number is the same and it has just a different customer number on the vendor file.
Okay. I may need to ask you offline a little bit more. I'm a little curious to know about what that means and what the implications of that would be to the city.
Yeah.
Okay. When you talked about conflicts of interest, and you said it was 13 likely were conflicts with small dollar amounts, what kind of amounts would you say they were?
Less than $1,000.
Less than $1,000. Okay.
So there were things where they were an employee and then their spouse's company, and that someone else in the city had purchased something from the spouse's company.
Okay. And then you said something about it would have to come to council?
Yes, that's in the purchasing bylaw. Any conflicts of interest need to come to council for approval to purchase from that vendor.
Okay. And we would be then made aware that there was some relationship between the vendor and the staff person?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Councillor Gazzola.
Just going back to 3.5, you talked about vendors missing documentation. Can you explain that? What do you mean by that?
On 3-5?
You talked about vendors missing documentation.
Oh, that was under the contractor safety program. So they are the city representative that is hiring that particular vendor is required to get from them their WSAB certificate, their insurance certificate, and a few other documents. So when I looked in our database for those documents, they were missing.
So it's not the vendors that's at fault. We're at fault for not.
Yes.
Yeah, not okay. That's why I couldn't equate that to the vendors. Going back to this this issue of 820, you keep saying fictitious, but duplicates.
Duplicates, yes.
A better word. Well, how many vendors do we have?
Thousands upon thousands.
No, that's what I mean, though. So to have duplicates. That's why I wondered what the number was. Like I know in my contacts list, a lot of duplicates. Yeah. They happen very easily.
It happens, definitely.
Do we have any idea of how many vendors we might have in the city? Ballpark, I'm not.
I'm
It doesn't matter. Okay, it's a lot. I know. The other point, though, with even if you were to have a fictitious vendor, there are other controls that come into play also, are there not?
There are, and that's why I say we have a very strong control framework. So anything that needs to go through SAP, we've got approvals within that. So presumably the onus is on the division management who is seeing these charges come through their budgets to question it, to say whether it's real or not. Now, if the name was, if someone was truly trying to be fraudulent, they could make the name look so real that maybe the manager wouldn't notice because it's something that they normally purchase. That was my concern.
But doesn't someone have to assign for having received the goods or services before we pay them?
Yes. Now, if it's the person that's being the fraudulent employee, they would sign that they had received it.
Yes, they've got an awful lot of jobs. The last question I wondered, what does the SAP system is that the system you use?
Yes.
Is there no way that it's set up that it will kick something out right away if it looks like a duplicate?
I don't believe so.
I mean, a lot of systems, if I try to use my email address, it comes back and says that address has already been used, sort of thing.
It's something that we can look into with the SAP team. I know that the current process is that when the admin staff are entering a new customer number, that they do search on the name and the address, but obviously some have got through the cracks, and some of the ones where the name was similar, it was just a slight difference in the spelling of the name.
Thank you.
Mr. Chapman, you wanted to add something?
Through you, Mr. Chair. I think the point's well made. Even after we clean them up, I would suspect that we will still have hundreds of duplicates. So one example would be the region of Waterloo. We are billed by the headquarters in Kitchener. We're billed by their offices in Waterloo. We're billed by locations across the region. So even after we clean them up, I would expect that we'll have perhaps a dozen accounts for the region, simply because we're paying invoices to different locations billed by the region. So we're not surprised by this, although we do know that there are some names that should be cleaned up, and that'll be the work of purchasing over the next year.
I guess the same thing would apply if we're buying things from like a Home Depot or something.
Yes, where there's
Right.
different branch locations. Yeah.
Staples, Home Depot, whatever. Okay. Councillor Marsh.
Thank you, Karina, for the thorough presentation. It's always a pleasure to see your work because you always do such a good job from my experience on Compass Kitchener. But just I wanted to ask you, now that this audit is complete with your recommendations included, what is the follow-up? What's the evaluation process, and how will we know? Is it just a matter of course that 6 months later or some number that we'll see a follow-up to the recommendations?
Yes. The immediate process is that the director will need to come up with an action plan, and that just comes back to me so that I know kind of what the plan is to address the findings, and I'm satisfied with the actions that they're taking. The schedule for the follow-up audits is not less than a year. There will be a follow-up audit at some point.
And then does that come to council, the
Yes.
follow-up audit?
Yes, and that will cover just basically looking at the recommendations in the original report and the status of each, and then what are the key accomplishments, what things are still outstanding that need to be tackled, and are there any emerging new issues that need new recommendations?
Great, thank you.
Councillor Schneider.
Hi, my questions are dealing with the culture issue. And it said, without exception, all employees had feedback on that, and there's shared acknowledgement between frontline staff and team members and management about this. So in helping to correct these culture issues, would the director have, they've got to come up with a plan, but would they have access to help from HR, maybe outside help to help correct the culture issues?
Yes, they could rely on HR to help with that, certainly.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Netsky.
One question that caused me some interest, which I thought was very interesting, is at the bottom of page 3-5, through the responsibility of going through a strategic procurement analysis, upon maybe opportunities of giving discounts and savings. And I thought when we go through a tender process, you go to the lowest bidder, et cetera. And I'm just wondering how this will all come about, or what the strategy is on this.
So with that, I was referring more to if you're buying in bulk. So say a number of divisions need to buy fence, and you can get it. If you coordinate with all of the buyers that are dealing with those internal divisions and being able to know that we have a larger quantity that we can buy, perhaps that we could get quantity discounts and things like of that nature. Still, the purchasing processes are still in place, so low bid within spec still applies. I don't know what else to say about it. I don't know if you guys have any comments on.
Okay, I understand that. Thank you.
Okay, there don't appear to be any further questions. Somebody want to move this? Moved by Councillor Fernandez. Sorry? Any discussion? Sorry? There's a recommend. Oh, sorry. You're right. So there isn't a need for a motion. Good catch. Thank you, sir. Keep the chair in line. So with that, motion to adjourn. Councillor Ioannidis. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you very much. See you all at 7.